Welcome to Your Aha Life, the podcast that invites you to slow down, reflect, and reconnect with what matters most. I'm your host, Tonya Cornileus, and whether you're navigating change, stepping into a new chapter, or simply curious about what's possible, this space is for you. So wherever you are, get comfortable. Let's explore the insights, stories, and aha moments that move us forward. Hi, everyone. Welcome back to Your Aha Life, the podcast. I'm your host, Tonya Cornelius, and today I have a very special guest with me, Sean Harvey, and I'm going to read a little bit of his bio and welcome him to the show. So first of all, why don't I just say, hey, welcome, Sean. Welcome to the podcast.
Oh, thank you for having me. It's great to be here.
Yeah, this is a first for me because I don't believe in all of the act one of the podcast or now the act two of the podcast that I've ever had a conversation like the one we're going to have. And usually I'm just talking to a kind of a general audience about, topics that apply to everyone, right? And today, this topic, I think, applies to everyone, but it's about a certain population that is the subject of a lot of conversations of late. And I'm so excited. I could not have this as a solo podcaster. I'd had to bring you on to help me do this. But before we get into it all, why don't I read a little bit of your bio, and then we're going to jump into how you got into this topic around men. That's what we're talking about today, men. And we'll just go from there, whatever the flow of the conversation takes us. But first, your bio. Sean Harvey is the founder of the Warrior Compassion Institute. As a leadership and cultural strategist, he helps organizations reimagine how they engage men to humanize systems and drive transformation. He is the founder of Project Compassion, a national initiative to deepen compassion in policing, and formerly served as head of personal transformation and well-being at Eileen Fisher. We're going to start there.
Okay.
Sean has held faculty roles at Cornell, NYU, and Baruch College. Did I say that right? Baruch College, and currently teaches men, masculinity, and extremism at American University, while serving as a fellow with PERIL, stands for the Polarization and Extremism Research and Innovation Lab. Wow. Maybe we'll get a chance to get into a little bit of that. He partners across sectors from corporate to public safety to cultivate leaders and bridge builders for healthier workplace cultures. Again, I welcome Sean.
Thank you.
So happy to have you here.
I'm looking forward to our conversation.
Me too. First of all, we have to time ourselves because we are never short on things to talk about, and we can go on and on. But this topic is interesting to me because and not many of my audience may know that my dissertation studies were really around men, Black men in particular, on how they navigate corporate spaces and how their experiences inside of corporate differ from perhaps their white male counterparts or even their other Black female counterparts. So I've been studying men, I guess you could say, for a while now, but you've really not just studied them as a subject, but to really explore, what men, what's on the minds and hearts of men. And so today, that's what we're talking a lot about. We're talking about masculinity. We're talking about deeply held emotions, the quiet yearning that we've called it. And so it'll be an interesting conversation. We have a lot to cover. But before we just get into all of that, I want you to tell me how you started. So we said you were going to start at Eileen Fisher. So let's start there.
Right. No, terrific. One of my favorite places to start. So I'm gonna start right before that. So I was a organization development consultant, working mostly with Wall Street and big media companies in New York. And on my 40th birthday, I hit my wall with trying to create miracles in 2-hour intervals. And you know what I'm talking about.
Yeah, the 2-hour workshops that were supposed to be so transformational, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
So on my 40th birthday, I walked into my CEO's office and I said, I've lost my heart and my soul in the job, and I resigned as my birthday present. And within 2 weeks, an opportunity came along at Eileen Fisher. And it was to be essentially, the role was an organization development partner, but it was really the internal change agent for all creative teams, from the branding to the designers to the merchandisers. And but I went on an 8-month interview to get the job. And on my first day after getting the job, my two bosses sat me down and they said, Sean, we just want to acknowledge that you have proven yourself in the interview process. We now want you to stop proving yourself and learn how to be who you actually are. When you interviewed with us, you showed us your heart and you showed us your polish. We hired you for your heart and we want to see less of your polish. And that really, one, who says that?
Who says that? Right there, that should have said volumes about the culture. I mean, who says we absolutely want you to bring your full, authentic self into this workplace? Right.
So one, it was like, who says this? And two, it was how many men hear this? And so I took it as I look back, both invitation and permission. So invitation to take a step on a new journey of self-discovery, and two, to have permission to be whoever that person is that comes through by doing the inner work. So I, and the organization was very progressive in nature. We meditated at the beginning of every meeting. We were having conversations on the integration of the masculine, feminine. We were, had a leadership approach that valued personal transformation, valued, the simplicity, it valued creativity and being organic and being in flow. And so these qualities.
Why did you? So Eileen Fisher, was it predominantly a female work environment, or how do you think they got a culture? Because you're talking, what year is this?
I
you're
started
talking about
2013 to 2014 was when I interviewed and started the job.
Yeah, so a decade ago,
Yeah.
a little more than a decade ago, when not many companies were talking about bring your whole self to work, two, starting meetings with meditations. Many still don't do that today. And just having conversations around the appreciation of differences. So it's just remarkable that was happening at Eileen Fisher back in 2013.
Right. No, exactly. And so one of the things I started to notice, so I was there for 5 years. And one of the things I noticed was that, it was a company that was 83% women. So I would notice how men were being transformed in this culture that was very compassion centered, that was very generative and generous. And And often I would say, hey, I would talk to men in the company. I'm like, yo, I'm changing. Are you changing? And they're like, yeah, my wife said, and it always started with my wife or my girlfriend. My wife said, I listen differently. Uh,
Mm,
my wife said I uh, was more patient. I stopped needing to be right all the time, and I started to be more curious. I started to have more access to my emotions and um, expressing more freely. I was tapping into my creativity and I was solving problems differently. I had more patience with the with being in the gray versus black and white thinking. And every man would say, and I feel more comfortable in my own skin by working at this company. And so,
that's
we
amazing.
have to bottle this up and take it out in the world. And Eileen Fisher also sent me to an artist commune in Canada for 5 months. So 5 weekends over 5 months, I was in Canada learning how to incorporate the arts into creative facilitation, and that's where I got received the spiritual call to work with men. Now I had left
Yeah.
Wall Street to never have to work with men again, so I knew this was above my pay grade. And when I got the calling, and so, but the environment really showed me from a Wall Street, you know, high pressure consulting environment, you know, of what one model could look like. And Eileen Fisher showed the complete opposite model. And I was left going, well, what if we took the best of both and say, could we think about organizational structure in a different way and the ways we engage men differently?
Wow.
Yeah.
That was like a huge opportunity there. And they gave you the support to do that. And so you got an opportunity to focus in on men and work with men. What did that look like in the early days of you doing that?
Um, it actually, I think some of the bigger work was convincing men that that why don't we actually talk about this and like what we're experiencing. So I was um, had support from the organization, and it was actually just trying to find the men who would be open. But one of the things that we did as a company for all employees is we introduced personal transformation work to all employees, and that included Enneagram work, ego relaxation work, limiting beliefs work, shadow work, somatic work, embodied leadership. And really, this idea, Eileen was doing personal transformation work herself and said, I want to bring this to my employees and to our customers. And in doing so, she said, I could train you to be more productive, but I'd rather create space for you to become a better human. And then trusting that as you do your inner work, you're just going to be more productive in general.
Yeah.
You know,
I think that's what so many people, I won't even just say companies, what so many people don't get that. So, of course, I've spent my career very much like you, OD trained and leadership development and employee development, and largely focused in the areas of professional development and skills training in order to do their jobs more effectively, or teaming more, teams functioning more effectively and high performance and all those things. And then yet there was this deep inner knowing that the part that was missing was the human side
right,
of the individual and the personal transformation, as you talk about it.
right,
So it's so great that you had, the top leader, the founder, the owner, the CEO, who was going through her own
right.
personal transformation and saw the benefits of that and how the ripple effect actually improves overall performance, productivity, engagement, all the things that companies strive to work toward. And hence, not that it's a silver bullet, but it's definitely tapping into the person, tapping into personal transformation. Yeah.
It's interesting as you talked about the inner knowing. We wrote an article for the Journal of Management, Spirituality, and Religion on nurture about the soul of the company, Eileen Fisher. And we asked employees, we said, so what do you think is the soul of this company? Really looking at workplace spirituality. And one of the, some of the responses, but one in particular was that, well, it's Eileen, of course. She trusts and believes in the deep intuitive knowing more than empirically based data, and built a company built on the inner and intuitive knowing that helped create a company that was $500 million annually in revenue.
Yeah. Yeah. The leadership, top leadership, and, you can't underestimate that, so that's your start.
Right.
Let's fast forward. Tell us a little bit about Warrior Compassion Institute.
Mm-hmm.
How did you get there?
So that's actually been Warrior Compassion Institute itself as an entity has been around for just coming up on a year. So my prior company was called Symphonia Studios, Symphonia being the Greek word for compassion. So Compassion Studios. And so my journey has been at the root of everything is how do we deepen compassion? Right after I finished seminary, my next call on the journey was to work with police. And so a group of us formed in 2020 an initiative that became a national initiative called Project Compassion, deepening compassion in police departments. And that the journey, one, is like, okay, what does it look like for police officers, for corrections officers, for folks in law enforcement to deepen compassion? And it actually stemmed from a request from a police chief that I had met on the journey, who asked me, one, could I help him deepen the level of compassion among his officers? And two, could we create conversations that humanize officers and community members for a new relationship going forward? And in that work, it's like, okay, what's actually going to resonate? How do you bring compassion in a way that folks can receive it, and especially officers? And that is really where Warrior Compassion came out as my book, Warrior Compassion: Unleashing the Healing Power of Men, and just this idea of what are different ways to engage folks. And so where Warrior Compassion Institute is today is really, I'm asking the question, how do we engage the hardest to reach men and the hardest to access systems? Because my belief is that when we play at those edges, or when we go to what people say is the impossible work, that's where we discover the possibilities, and that in gradation that can apply to men across the continuum, like even raising up aspects of men's psyche, of men's shadows, of men's egos that maybe they're not conscious of how they're showing up, or even, oh yeah, I can relate to that. And from a spiritual perspective, I think we're often we hold numerous shadows. The question is, which ones have we worked through based on our healing our wounds, and how can we then just be on this path of personal development, of professional growth? And one of the things that I said early on was, oftentimes men won't invest in personal growth, but they will invest in professional development or career success or leadership development. So what if we embed personal growth in professional development? And so to say, okay, give the skills that are going to require that you do a little bit of inner work. And so often I look at that as, men leading as facilitators, men leading as bridge builders, men leading as conscious change makers, and the inner work to actually do your work effectively. It's kind of part of my strategy.
Yeah, well, that's a great strategy, because you're right. I mean, men in particular, even some women, but we're talking men today. You're right. They have a harder time, with vulnerability at times. And certainly, yeah. So I love the strategy of baking the personal development and transformation inside of the professional development.
Right.
So I want to, we said there's a quiet yearning going on within men. I'd love for you to expound upon that. It says, my question here is, what do you believe men today are most yearning for? If we say there's this quiet yearning, what is it? What kind of crossroads are men finding themselves at? And really, it's challenging them from the inside out.
Yeah. Well, I think, as you asked more of the question, I started to pivot my response. I would say the most obvious is, I think, the yearning is deeper connection. Deeper connection with self, deeper connection with others. And even if men can't always articulate it, the deeper yearning is often, do I matter? Am I connected? Do I have people who care about me? Do I have people that I care about? And I think and do men have hope? I think there's some of the fundamentals. We can talk about a lot of other different things that men want, but I think what the yearning is more at that level.
And honestly, when you were saying those things, I'm thinking to myself, of course. That's what all people want. They want deeper connection. They want authenticity. They want to feel like they matter. They want hope. They want to be heard. They want to be listened to. Why do you think it's tougher for men? I mean, I know socialization, all of those things, but you've been working with men for a number of years now. What are you finding?
I think I'm going to go back to what I experienced at Eileen Fisher, which was invitation and permission. Right. I think what we're not talking about is stigma, the stigma of personal growth. I think what are some of the deep-seated fears that men experience? To be vulnerable means to admit what? To be vulnerable risks what? How could you be perceived if you demonstrate vulnerability? How could it be used against you? Or how could it be perceived around your own level of strength? So I think there's a lot of competing ideas that make it more difficult, from the stigma, from the permission, from the how will I look, to I don't need it, but the other guy does. Right.
Yeah.
And so I think one of the challenges I have and where we are today is there's a lot of conversation around the crisis of men being in crisis. Now, most of the men I know would never say that they're in crisis, even if they are. So it's probably not going to be the thing that resonates. It's great for research papers and talking points, but the real engagement with men, I think, comes down to what's real for them. Which conversations allow for the permission to be able to go there. And so when I was writing my book, one of the things that really came out in terms of men's fears is to be vulnerable in front of other men. And often that fear is ridicule, or that fear is weakness, or that fear is being dominated by showing up authentically. So some of the language that we talk about, it might be our aspiration for men, but it may not be what they aspire to for themselves, right? Even though that's what they want. So that's why I think it's important that when we talk about the deeper yearning, we do it in ways that guys can hear the message and respond to it, and to understand what might be the trigger points where they may react versus respond. And so I think it's the, openings are often, let's talk about the quality of your relationships or friendships. Let's talk about, what might be the patterns coming up in your relationship with your romantic or significant partner. In terms of, from a career standpoint, what's really playing out for you in terms of your sense of purpose and sense of mission, and where are you feeling called to contribute. I often frame it in 4 questions, like the existential questions.
Okay, let's go.
So my second master's was in existential psychotherapy. So I always go to the existential questions and just the who am I beneath my protective layers? Why am I here? So what brought me on this planet? Not just what do I do for a living, but why am I on this planet? What am I here to do? Well, being on this planet, and how do I love? How do I bring love into my relationships? So who am I? Why am I here? What am I here to do? How do I love? And really take.
You know what I call those kinds of questions,
Yeah.
Sean? I call them, they are existential, yes.
Right.
I call them perennial, like perennial plants. They keep coming back, they keep coming up for us
Right.
until we answer them.
Right.
And the answers can differ throughout different stages of life. So that is also a reason they keep coming back, for us to kind of update our narratives. But yeah, when we don't spend time with ourselves, or talking it out through therapy, coaching, or elsewhere, we have nowhere to go with those questions that are still within us. And so I call them, perennial questions. I love those questions.
So I'm going to take what you just said and add another layer for men.
Okay.
Which is the time we need alone is important. The time we need with guided support is important. But I think the time men need in community with other men grappling with these questions is equally important. Because I think what I find in the work is one of the most powerful things we do if we're doing a corporate men's circle, if we're doing a retreat, if we're doing taking guys just out on a hike and having some deep conversations. One, they realize they're not alone. But more importantly, they realize they're not the only one.
Yeah.
And why I think that's important is a lot of guys will spend for these questions pondering in their own head, or they'll be making sense of a world that's changing around them. And they're like, what's the right message? There's competing messages of how I'm supposed to be a man. There's competing messages from women, from other men, from the systems, from work. All these things saying you have to be like this. And we don't have spent enough time asking men, how do you want to be? And when men are given the invitation to just ask the questions themselves in the company of other men, it's like, oh, I was thinking that too, or whoa, I'm not as crazy as maybe I thought I was, And other guys are asking similar questions or having similar thoughts. And that starts to break down maybe some of the terminal uniqueness the guys might have, and also to be able to see themselves and mirror their humanity with other men to say, oh, and someone who might be different, then they can say, oh, I have similarities here and I can respect our differences. And so
I have so much coming to my head about this. First of all, that, I can't even only imagine. I'm curious at the breakthroughs that happen in those circles, where there is an invitation, and they have space, opportunity, and support to grapple with those existential or perennial questions, and not feel alone, not feel weird about it, not feel in any way that vulnerability is a weakness, but vulnerability becomes their strength, So I'm so curious about that. So I want to ask you what breakthroughs you've seen, but also we were talking before we hit record about this new book that Professor Galloway has been going on the talk circuit about. Neither of us have read the book, but it just draws attention to, as you said, there is this, in a nice way, I would say, there is this sensitivity that men do appear to be somewhat in crisis or at a crossroads at a minimum of how they want to be in the world, how they get to be
Right.
in the world, and how they can pull back or take off the mask or pull back all of these societal narratives and expectations that's been placed on them, and maybe move in a more authentic way in the world. So I know I've just given you a couple of big rocks
Right.
to react to, but first, any breakthroughs that you've seen in that, and what's been that experience? And then second, what do you think about all of this talk going on in all the books and talk circles
Right.
about men?
So in terms of breakthroughs, what I'll say is, when I did my first corporate men's circle for an energy company, at the very end, what really struck me was the feedback at the end was, a thank you. Thank you to the company for being forward thinking, but a thank you for the space and what the comment was is thank you for giving us the space to talk about the things we never knew we were allowed to talk about at work. And again, going back to that permission piece.
Yeah.
It's also interesting when people ask me why not just do a mixed gendered experience. And my first reaction kind of is, well, I don't think women need another white guy telling them how to do their um and but I actually in a conversation, and we'll go back to OD, a master's in organization development class in Virginia. I was with the students and we did a demonstration of a men's circle with other students watching like in a fishbowl.
Okay.
Right. And so one of the students raised his hand in the beginning and said, hey, Sean, this is not a men's circle. I said, why not? I said, well, because women are watching. And said, okay, let's just dig into that. What happens when women are in the mix or when they're watching? And he said, well, we can't be real. We can't be honest. We can't talk about what we need to talk about. And we're afraid of being offensive. So we just don't say anything and we shut down.
Mm.
And then it wasn't just the comment, it was the nods from the other guys in the space going, yeah, that's real for us. And I don't think so we can be in the conversation that, men have been the dominant, white men in particular have been the dominant force. We can talk about, what it's like for folks who are in leadership and power. At the same time, what I'm talking about is the conversations that we aren't having, where there's a suffering or struggling in silence that is actually having the impact and the effect of some of what we're seeing today.
Yeah.
And so when we can really create space for the conversations that need to be happening in ways that create the safety, the vulnerability to come through, and for men to be courageous enough to talk about the things that they typically don't feel they can talk about. So that one,
Yeah. Which is a beautiful thing.
yeah, it's powerful.
By the way, in women's programs, retreats, women's leadership development programs, I think the dynamic would change also if women were sitting around in a circle in a fishbowl and men were watching them.
Right.
So I believe, yeah, in any of those contexts, it becomes artificial in that experience. So thank you for sharing that. What do you think about all the talk right now about men?
So then the talk. So I think what gives me hope when people ask me what gives you hope right now is seeing so many men coming out to work with other men or young men and boys. And that you have dads groups, you have men's groups, you have men's coaches, you have men's facilitators, you have, the Scott Galloways, the Richard Reeves, the Equimundos, these different organizations that are really spearheading new conversations around, if we call it healthy masculinity, modern manhood. What does it mean to be a man today? And what are the consequences if we don't attend to some of this? So I think that's promising. The flip side is, and where I tend to challenge folks is how are we reaching men across the continuum? Not just the men that are most like us or the men that we're most comfortable with. And so I also believe in the work of helping men become bridge builders And in that, how do we become bridge builders to ourselves and each other? And then also, then how are we evolving so then we can be bridge builders across gender, across sexuality, across race, across culture, but through a lens of our agency, through a lens of bringing the skills and practices and principles of bridge building, and to understand that by healing men, we can start to elevate all.
You start to elevate all.
Yeah.
And I love your approach because we're not talking about fixing men.
Right.
Although some can feel broken, some can feel they've not been permitted, if you will, to be who they truly are in this world. And that can be really heavy to carry. But we're not here to just, say that men are so broken with somebody, we need to go fix them.
Right.
We're saying we need to listen. We need to understand. We need to create space.
Right.
We need to uplift. And I love your notion. That's why I say I love your approach of how can other men be bridge builders to men? How can we create this whole ecosystem of men supporting other men?
Right.
And so that's the work that you feel called to do. So I have to ask you I think we're already pushing on our time, but I have to ask you about your own transformation.
Yeah.
So tell me a little bit about what you're getting out of this work and what's been your transformation that you'd like to share.
I think before I answer that, I just want to go back to your point on brokenness.
Okay.
So one of the things that I'm very intentional about, both in the book and just in general, is, and I'm often changing the narrative to let's not even call men broken. And I often say men are not broken, but men are often wounded. Systems are broken, and often the broken systems wound men. So let's
I love
attend
that.
to, and I often ask folks, if I'm going to work with someone, I have 4 criteria that I often look for with potential partners, work partners. Do you have the stomach, the will, the skill, and the cred? So first, do you have the stomach to work across ideological difference without flinching, to accept all men, not just those that are most similar to you or points of view? And then my next question is the will. Do you love men, or do you have contempt for men? Are you trying to fix men, or do you really believe men can heal? And that by healing men, we can start to heal society. It's a different orientation from the healing to the fixing to the healing. The next piece is what I call the skill. And so it's and language I often use, it's 4 parts. Do you understand dude psychology? So not pathologizing clinical psychology, but like the universal psychology of men and the male psyche. Just how do guys respond, and how do guys respond or react, across the continuum of masculinity, across race, across sexuality. There's certain things that are still universally men. What is that? Well, honoring the complexity of men and individual difference. Do you understand dude psychology, individual transformation and healing, group process and organizational systems design and thinking and change? And those 4 pieces then create a more holistic approach for how we do this work. And then last is cred. Do you have the credibility to stand in front of these guys and be taken seriously? So I really think there's a piece, and I wanted to bring it back to how are we customizing our approaches? And I often say the work doesn't change. The deeper inner work doesn't change, but the invitation needs to the audience so they can really hear it and receive it without feeling forced upon, right? So I'll often say, I'm not going to tell you what healthy masculinity is. That's not my job. But my job, I believe, and the way I do the work is I'm going to ask you the questions to get beneath your protective layers so that you can discover that truth for yourself. as opposed to saying this is the model that we want all men to operate in. Let's honor the complexity of men and really be curious about their story, their narrative, their history, and their perspective.
Yeah.
So then
I love that. That's honoring, like you say, the complexity, the diversity of men, their own individual definitions of what masculinity means to them, instead of them for too many generations. Men have tried to force fit themselves into this very, generalized definition. And when they didn't fit in, that's when they felt as an outcast,
right.
isolated and alienated from not living up to who we said men should be in society. Now, I am going to press you. Your own transformation.
Yeah. No, I was going to get to that.
Okay.
My own transformation. I would say on this journey, I think first was I had to look at my own fears of men. I think for the last 7 years, I had to go from Eileen Fisher speak to police speak. And how do I do the linguistic gymnastics? I work with a lot of, I did a lot of my work with progressive men, and now I work with a lot of conservative or men who hold conservative values and beliefs. I teach the course on extremism, and so being able to, I think one of the biggest lessons for me in my own growth was when I see someone who holds more extreme views or extremist views, how to separate the humanity of the man from the views of the man, to love the humanity of that man while, even if I can't stand the views of the man, but get curious about the views while holding the person from a place of wholeness and how they can come into the full integration of who they are and challenge their own beliefs and views. And so I think that this journey has just continued to challenge me to go deeper in my own compassion for other men. And then I think the flip side of it is looking at my own shadows of where I still have work to do.
And accepting all of that, right?
To accept it and to also use it as part of, I think the challenging part is when we do this work with other men, that we're coming down from the pedestal or coming down from the mountain saying, here's the way, versus no, I've been in the muck with you and let me share my wisdom of how I've navigated that, versus to say that I'm coming from a superior place in that.
Right. Yeah. So good. So good. So I have like 2 more questions. One is, okay, so we're learning a lot about men, and again, this conversation probably could go another full hour and we still wouldn't cover everything. But what do you want, whether it's other men? I have, of course I have brothers, I have I have sons, I mentor young men. So I'm just as curious and just as interested. But those who have men as their partners and so forth, what's one bit of advice or that you would give, like, to how do we truly be with men so that they feel they can be who they truly are?
Right. I think first is to look in the mirror and ask, what are my attitudes, beliefs, and views of men? Do I love them? Do I want to fix them? Do I have contempt for them? Do I really want to be there for them? Do I sympathize? And also, I think, especially for women, actually, I just spoke at an all boys boarding school. And so 14 to 17-year-old young men. And one of the questions was, how do I stay authentic when women want me to perform?
Whoa.
Right? This is like a 15-year-old asking that question. And so I think what are our own perceptions and expectations of men? And can we be both honest and hold that while also holding space for men to share with us who they really are, what they really yearn for, and to be supportive of that, and to also look at what have we bought into around the masculine identity that we all are in relationship with. And so when we say men should be strong, what does that mean, and what latitude does it allow for men to be authentic? What grace and space do we have when men show vulnerability, and do we perceive that as weakness and then use that against?
Yeah.
I think part of it is just, having our own inner reckoning of how do we expect men? What are we projecting on the men, and what can we allow men to just be who they are in their fullness?
You know what comes up for me, and then I will get to the final question. What comes up for me is if I were asking that question to a woman, to women, we would say, we are so willing and ready, and we have done it time and time again, of hold space for men who still perhaps don't feel safe enough to share. So I do think this is an ongoing dialogue, ongoing conversation. I love, as we would do with anyone, is to first reflect on our own, where are we coming from with that. And I love that you bring that up first. And one thing that comes to me is that when we are healthy and whole, whoever we are, we can engage with another person in a more healthy and whole way.
Right.
And so I do think that these will be conversations that we will continue to have. And I think those dynamics and those relationships will continue to grow. And that's why I love your whole work around bridge building.
Yep.
Yeah.
And
so question. Oh God, I said I had one. I have two.
Okay.
We gotta hurry. Yeah. What encouragement would you offer men who are feeling lost or emotionally stuck or disconnected from himself at this time? How would you speak directly to men right now?
There are many resources and communities that are here for men, not to fix men, just to allow men to be, and to really ask their questions and really share, the questions that come from being lost or confused, space to hold the frustration, and also the space to hold the possibility. Yeah. I often say, I was in a meeting with Senate staffers after the Uvalde shooting, and so staffers on the Judiciary Committee, and in 30 minutes we talked about men's mental health, mass shootings, gun violence, police shootings, police suicides, and veteran suicides. And it really got me thinking about, the level of hopelessness that can be out there. And I think my job more than anything is, I stopped saying I meet men where they are, because I think that can be condescending. But I say, I know most men suffer in silence in some way. And so I often say I'll meet men in their suffering. I'm not going to fix it, but I'm going to meet them in it. I'm going to listen for their yearning, and I'm going to offer hope in the midst of both. And I think that hope that we can offer each other, that there's possibility, that men are not broken, and that we're on a journey. We're on an evolutionary journey in our planet, in society, and that there's a lot of people who are holding a lot of questions. And again, you're not alone, and you're not the only one.
Yeah. And so thank you for that. And if you have resources, certainly you are a resource, Warrior Compassion Institute, right. And the work that you're doing. So I will put that in the show notes. And if there are any other resources that you recommend, then, give them to me, and I'll put them in the show notes for sure. So this is the final question. Okay. So your AHA life, what does that mean to you, and how are you living your AHA life?
It's interesting. I've spent a lot of time over the last 7 years, really, I think, learning, growing, screwing up, trying, throwing darts, getting it wrong, learning, recalibrating, and really creating an architecture for this work that I find works and has the possibility of scale through a systems approach, and really leveraging, for me, the blend between men's healing and organization development has become my sweet spot. And I love seeing the intersection of these at a systems level. So my aha life then has become, now that I've really gotten to a point of the clarity and this work is where it wants to be so it can really grow and flourish. Now I'm like, okay, now what does my personal life look like? What does my social life look like? What does my dating life look like? And what type of life do I want to create? And so part of it is I love what I do. The question is not to become such a workaholic that I forget about the other parts of my life. It's about, finding people in community that can hold me. So I don't have to think about the work. I can just really be held as Sean, not Sean who does X.
Yes.
I also have been thinking about, second homing it in Denver or in the Colorado area, just having a retreat space where I'm not leading retreats, but I am on retreat when I'm not doing work, travel, and exploring the world. I'm a big foodie, and on my bucket list, still on my bucket list is I love to whitewater raft. So I want to whitewater raft on every continent. So I have 2 continents down, North America. I've also done it in Costa Rica and Malaysia and Asia and Southeast Asia. But yeah, I wanna keep doing my whitewater rafting.
Keep going.
Yeah.
Keep going.
Yeah.
Sean, thank you. Thank you so much. Again, I feel like we just scratched the surface here, but it's timely, and it's good for us to start the conversation, even if we have to come back later, which I'll invite you back to continue the conversation on this really important topic, just on being human in this world, and certainly the quiet yearning that men have, and and how do we listen? How do we listen for it? All right, Sean. So I want to ask you this final question. How can people get in touch with you and learn more about the work that you are doing?
I would say from a social media standpoint, LinkedIn is probably the best place.
Okay.
So LinkedIn.com and then Sean Harvey.
Okay.
And
SANHARVEY, and I'll put that in the show notes too.
Yes. You can always look at my website, warriorcompassion.com. And you can purchase my book on Amazon, Warrior Compassion, Unleashing the Healing Power of Men. And I just released on International Men's Day a new Substack called Dude Psychology, the unspoken truths of how men think, feel, love, hurt, and heal.
Wow. I'm so glad I asked this question. Love all of that. And thank you for sharing. And again, thank you for being with me.
Oh, thank you so much. This has been a pleasure.
Yeah. All right.
Okay.
Take good care.
All right. Thanks.
Thanks for spending time with me today. If something you heard sparked insight or stirred your spirit, I'd love for you to share it and leave a review. You can also join the AHA Life community at yourahalife.com for more inspiration and special member perks. Until next time, keep showing up with clarity, confidence, and authenticity, and keep choosing a life of more joy, more purpose, and more fulfillment. Take good care.